Hi, I'm Guy Powell, and welcome to the next episode of the Backstory on Marketing. If you haven't already done so, please visit ProRelevant.com and sign up for all of these episodes and podcasts. I am the author of the newly released book, The Post-COVID Marketing Machine, Prepare Your Team to Win. And you can find more information about the book at marketingmachine.prorelevant.com. Today, we'll be speaking with Kevin Hanegan. Kevin is a senior leader who likes to use data and analytics to transform, innovate, and continuously improve organizations to make them the best they can be. His passion is in the intersection of business, technology, learning, and psychology. He believes the world is constantly evolving, and we should always be evolving and improving ourselves in business and in our personal lives. He is a frequent speaker and writer on topics of data-informed decision-making, the future of learning, and growth, and the growth mindset. And lastly, he is the author of the book, Turning Data into Wisdom. Kevin, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Wow, thanks for the introduction. I hope I live up to all that. That sounded good.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. So, so tell us your backstory. How did you get into analytics and learning?
Yeah, everyone probably says they have unusual stories. I do think mine's a little bit unusual. So I'm technical by nature. Undergrad, I was math and computer science, and started getting my jobs out of university doing software programming. Actually, one of the programming languages I used was Ada, which was, I think, dead before I even learned it, more or less, except for a couple industries that still used it. But I realized that I started taking some night classes, and I realized that it's hard to keep up with the pace of change. And this is still 20 years ago. Now the pace of change is like daily as opposed to annually. And I was struggling with learning the new concepts. In my mind, I thought it's because there's going to be a better way to teach them. So I went back and got more education on adult learning, how adults can learn, which is a little bit different than how kids learn for different reasons. And it kind of just was this passion of technology's evolving. I still love being technical, but I love helping people understand how to evolve and leverage the skills that help them stay current and continue being relevant in today's time. And that's kind of led me to write the book and led me to where I am and talk about data literacy and data-informed decision-making, because it's a balance of, some technical skills. You don't obviously have to be a data scientist, but then also many other skills that we kind of forget about over time, different soft skills like curiosity and creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like your point about change. I kind of like the saying, it used to be that change is constant, but now change is accelerating. And it's almost like the pace of acceleration is accelerating because it is just, everything is just coming at us like you wouldn't believe. And in marketing, you've got the multiverse, and I'm sure in just technology and analytics, I mean, it's just enormous how fast that things are changing.
It's crazy. And I mean, again, going back to data, technical and learning, one of the things that relates to both of those with the change, a lot of times when we make decisions, or a lot of times when we're looking at what's our next business plan or looking at something similar, whether we're using predictive analytics or whether we're using our brain, it always goes back to, let's look at all of our history, whether it's what's stored in our long-term memory, or let's look at historical events to come up with a probability or a prediction to make a decision about what to do in the future. And the problem is we don't know what's going to happen in the future. I mean, your book, right? COVID, no one knew, people knew a pandemic was coming, but they didn't plan for it. Everything materially changes because you don't have that experience to do the modeling or do the intuition on. And so it creates all this uncertainty, which again, could be opportunity if you leverage it right, but it could also be disastrous if you don't.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one thing too, I think that we get wrong when I think about going back, I studied engineering and I use a lot of math and analytics, of course, but I don't really use any of my engineering skills. So it's almost like when you go to college, it's really how to learn. You're learning how to learn. And so you can be able to learn new things, because when you get out into the real world, it's very infrequent that you actually use a lot of what you were taught in college specifically for your job. So learning is a critical component of a corporation, and certainly of individuals, and it's kind of like a topic for everybody to be continually learning. So organizations have what's called now the role of a chief learning officer. Tell us what you understand under that.
Yeah, well, like you said, the world's evolving. There's more uncertainty. I'll date myself. When I was in college, cloud was a meteorology class. Now it's an IT course. So we need to keep our employees up to date. The skills that they're going to use, the technical skills that they're going to use to do their job, many times, the majority of times, they're not learning them in the university. So they have to learn them outside. Some individuals will go back and do that on their own, but it's important for organizations to keep top talent to provide those skills to them and apply it in a job setting. So you're not just teaching them the theory, but the benefit of doing it in an actual real life setting is you have real life examples. But it's not just technical skills. Like we said, the technology is evolving. When I think about going back to school, when I'm younger, and I have 4 kids, they're young, they always ask why. They're always curious. They're always challenging. And we encourage that. That's how they learn about the world. And I kind of feel like as you go through the typical schooling and universities, you kind of lose those skills. You don't learn as much about critical thinking or collaborative thinking or being curious. If when you're in kindergarten and you talk back to your parent or your teacher and ask why, usually they go along and they answer. When you do that in high school or college, you're not supposed to talk back. You're not supposed to question the teacher. They kind of take those soft skills out of us. Those are needed today because the world's changing. So we need those different perspectives. We need to critically challenge the data because there's so much data out there. People always say, you can make the data say whatever you want. The data never lies. It's fact. It's how you interpret it. And we don't get a lot of practice with those interpretation skills. And so that's a key role for me is, yes, we have to teach the latest technologies and things going forward, but we also have to teach people how to be resilient, how to do active listening, how to challenge assumptions, how to, use lateral thinking, how to increase their emotional intelligence, if not equally or potentially even more so than the technical skills. Because like you said, we learn how to learn in college. We don't learn how to do the soft skills in college.
That is very true. And on one of my previous interviews, and it plays as well with even male versus female, just the kind of the personality of male versus female and how they approach different questions and how they are more likely to challenge or less likely to challenge and more likely to ask, well, what do we need this for? Or not, and I think that's a really good point that you made. Now, does learning is that more closely related to HR or more closely related to the technical side of the business?
So at Qlik, where I work, it's both. Traditionally, learning was related to HR, as you were learning the compliance, you were doing learning and development, some of the soft skills, but maybe skills like project management or things that were mandatory to take for compliance regions. We kind of blend it. So we teach, obviously, our product. We teach some of the technologies that's related to it. We help educate the internal learning and development, these soft skills as well. So we'll have, monthly seminars on various soft skill topics. But I'm not saying that's how everyone does it. I think it's an evolving role. The role's been around for a while. And I think you're starting to see a pivot from just focused on HR internal to this broader umbrella due to the fact that everyone needs to keep upskilling and relearning and unlearning.
Yeah, and I think you're right. The maybe the soft skills are more on one side, or maybe shaded to the one side, whereas the harder skills of a specific type of analytics or a specific type or way to use a software product or whatever, that then really applies to the specific functions of your job as opposed to the how you can progress maybe and work better within the organization.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So now one of the things, especially as you talk about analytics, which is it's just exploding, and the need for analysts is exploding. But to your point about asking the questions and digging deep into the data and really understanding how to ask those questions is a big deal. So tell us about that. And then also, as I understand it, you're also working with what's called the Data Literacy Project. So maybe tell us a little bit about both of those.
Yeah, it's an effort to increase everyone's ability to work with data. And the key thing is that everyone's different. So let's take COVID as a perfect example. Everyone in the beginning of the pandemic was inundated with data and information. I guess taking a step back, when I say data, don't just think numbers. It's also qualitative. It's also information. It's statements. So we couldn't go 5 minutes on news without a chart or data or infographic about COVID. There's an element of data literacy, which is for the creators of that information. How do you create it in the most logical, rational way to get across an insight that is an actual insight? And so you might have seen in the beginning of COVID charts that showed flatten the curve, cumulative cases, which was scary. Like if the intent was let's scare people, which it might have been, that's great, but it also some of the graphs didn't take into account subtleties that someone who's a proper data analyst would know. Like it doesn't make sense to show cases on a daily basis because they ebb and flow, and you might have issues where it's a weekend, people don't go and take tests. So they started doing rolling averages, 7-day averages. They started saying, well, wow, it looks a lot worse over here. But wait, that town only has like 200 people, so it's not really a true sample size. So you started seeing the graphs evolving. That's one element of data literacy, but the most important element is there's probably a handful of people in an organization that build those charts and graphs. Everyone in the organizations, and with COVID, everyone in the world sees them, and they have to interpret them, and eventually they have to make decisions. So let's say it was the middle of 2020 and you had planned a family vacation. You're going to be going through some thought process. Okay, do I go on vacation? If I do, what are my questions? Well, what's my risk or probability of getting, or someone in the family getting sick? And then realistically, what's the probability of someone in the family getting seriously sick or even dying? You then have to take those graphs and understand the insights, and then weigh the probabilities. So, and that's the same in an organization. It's not COVID, it's sales data, it's marketing data, it's lead generation data. You're exposed to all this information. You have to make a question. And I think one of the key things that I like to educate people is the data is the data. It's how you interpret it. And some of that is personalized. You might be more risky. So you might say, my family, we're all healthy. We don't have any comorbidities. We're going to take a chance. We're going to go. Whereas someone else might have some elderly family members. They might have some more, their decision is different. It's the same data. That's the same thing in organizations. It's not black and white. And that's kind of why I love it. It's somewhere in between, and everyone can have a different answer to the same question. And I would never say this person's right, this person's wrong. It's all about what their outcome is, what their ability to handle the probability and the risk is, and their thought process. So that's why it really fascinates me.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's about 3 or 4 questions that came up while you were talking, but one was a statement. I used to be friends with a guy that was one of the I think it was VP of analytics or VP of research at Xerox, and he was the global VP. And one of the challenges that they had early on when he first started, and then he fixed it, was that everybody was using their own data around the world. And so everybody was making their numbers because they had their own data. And their own data was then based on different ways that it was collected or researched or however they got to it. And everybody was making their numbers, but the company was losing money. And so, I mean, there's 2 things there, but one of them was one of the big challenges he had to undertake was to homogenize the way the data was defined across the whole organization. And that was critical. And then once he got that done, then it really made sense. As when somebody would say, well, what's your data based on? It had to be based on this one data set. And if they used anything else, then they would, they'd get dinged or whatever from that.
Absolutely. It's a common challenge we see in organizations. And some of the time it happens because we tend to, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do this, but we tend to, I'm going to say, start backwards. We start with, let's build our data model. Let's build our data warehouse. Let's organize it. And then after that, let's go and publicize it. And let's take requests for questions that we can answer with it. I like to start with the decision and the question first. What are we trying to do? Because then you can work backwards. It's okay if you have a data warehouse, but in that situation, when you're working backwards, you're going to be like, okay, what is our definition of sales target, pipeline, whatever it is? And it allows you to focus in only on that data, ignore anything else that kind of isn't relevant. And it tends to save time because things that are irrelevant, you're not using. I saw some study a couple of weeks ago that said organizations that tend to put their data in a data warehouse, maybe about it was either between 30 or 35% of that data ever gets touched again. So that's 65% of the time invested on putting data that you might need, you don't actually ever need, or maybe you need it, you just can't use it for whatever reason. It's wasted time.
Yeah, and although, and I agree with you about understanding what the business question is first, and then working back, and quite often on data like that, what we've seen in the marketing space, and when you're trying to build a marketing machine, is you kind of have a feel that, well, this question would be interesting, but we do need a certain amount of data before we can actually use it. Now, the never get touched, that's a different issue, but at least, you may need to wait for a year, maybe 2 years before you feel you have not only enough time series data, but you also have the data being accurate, because quite often, especially if it's manually entered, you could have errors in how they're entering it. It takes some time for them to learn how to enter it properly. And then all of a sudden, now you have something that you can use and be confident that your data is accurate. So, but
absolutely. Just on that, I totally agree. And I want to clarify, you always store the data. I was thinking more about like building a special warehouse or lake that might have some transformations built into it, but the raw data, absolutely. Because if you ask a question and then you look down the pipe and then the data is empty,
Yeah. Yep. And plus, you brought up when you were talking, I was thinking that, you think about the long tail. I mean, clearly the top of that chart is, really the important stuff. And then, maybe, a year or two down the line, when you're starting to granularize and improve the way you're asking the questions, or detail out the way you're asking the questions, then you need the next thing. And then you kind of have this long tail out there, which is might be useful in the future. And then it really just depends on, at some point, what the priorities are or what have you, and where it might actually become useful.
Absolutely. Well, and that's a good point. Today's, again, going back to COVID, everything changed. So the data that organizations used about their customers, I'm willing to bet a majority of it, not a majority, but some of it was different in a COVID world. Yeah. And so if they didn't have that long tail to draw back on, they'd be starting from scratch. The companies that already had it, even if they weren't using it there. So I agree with having the data set, because especially today, things change so fast. The companies that pivot quick will be the ones that, succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And that fast failing, or fail fast, is critical. I think, one of the other things on data that we've run into is a lot of times people will start to collect data, and they'll use it for a couple of years, and then the world will have changed, and then they're afraid to turn the data collection off. And it might be costing them money, but they're afraid to actually turn it off because, well, I don't know, maybe we do need to use that at some point in the future. And I'm sure you've run into situations like that as well.
We have, and it's not always the case, but many times it comes down to this. I'm generalizing here that we as humans, we have biases, and there are different types of bias. And one of the more common ones is business would be risk aversion or fear of change. There's also a bias which is the complete opposite, which is where you change even when you don't want to. But I've seen that hundreds of times where people will see the writing on the wall, so to speak, about the new evolution of the business model, and they just don't change the fear. But they kind of deep down inside know they have to change, they have to evolve, they have to not use that data that way anymore, but they still tend to hold on to. And that's one of the beauties of a decision-making framework and working with different people, is you get those different perspectives where people, if you're comfortable challenging, which goes back to we don't learn how to challenge in school, you're going to lead to better results if you're in a team where you're comfortable challenging with the people above you.
Yeah, and I think that is definitely a skill, but also inhibitions to be able to say to the boss, hey, listen, hold on a second, I'm not exactly sure whether we're doing it right or interpreting it right or the data is correct. And that, I will admit, in some organizations, just by the personality of the organization, that can be very difficult.
It's one of the biggest roadblocks we see is this culture change. It has happened in certain organizations, but in many of them, it's hard to stop behaviors and do something different. And if you've been brought up in a culture where it's a very hierarchical organization from a culture, and you're not supposed to talk back, and that's how you were grown up, it's nearly impossible to just all of a sudden switch and change. Even just, I mean, I was my son's baseball team. Someone asked the coach, like, why are we doing batting practice today? And instead of like answering the question so they get the perspective, they're just like, because I told you so. I see that because I told you so in business, to the point that people stop asking. And the reason they're asking, not every time, because there are times people ask because they're trying to be troublemakers, but there are times they're asking because they want to know why, because it helps them learn. So then the next time they won't do it. And the next time, maybe they even go early and start batting practice or whatever they're doing in business, because they understand why. But you're right, is sometimes people don't have the comfort level to do that, and they usually don't have it because in the past they've been, scolded for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go back a second, though. And one of the problems in marketing, and marketers quite often got into marketing because they didn't want to worry about the data. Now, it turns out the modern marketer that especially is working on the web or in social or anything that's digital, there's a ton of data there. And but there are still marketers that are afraid of data. They got into marketing, or they got into kind of that type of a position because they hated math and they hated data. And so in that case, how do you put together now, how do you work with them to help them to really learn how to understand the data, question the data, and then start to actually get insights and results out of that data?
It's a $1 million question, right? What I try to start with is tell individuals, you do not need to be a data scientist. Even further, you do not need to be a data analyst. Most organizations, most individuals, they need to be able to consume the data, to interpret it. So I think of it as a puzzle. Is each piece of the puzzle is data, and as you put it together, you kind of have this insight. And what we need to educate and make people aware of is how do you're never going to have all the puzzle pieces. Imagine you have a 10,000 piece puzzle and it's your business answer, and 200 pieces are missing. You still have to come together and put the puzzle. So how do you do that? Well, it's those skills we talked about. It's you talk to your peers about what is their perspective. It's you trial and error. It's you try some of your challenging assumptions. You try things out and learn from them. And so what I try to tell people is there's so much data. The answer to all the world's problems, we have the data somewhere. We just haven't connected the dots and then rallied the change management. And that's been proven many times. We have those answers. It more and more people that are open to saying, okay, I am not a data expert, but I am comfortable challenging the data. I'm comfortable working with the data. And then what I tell them is they're already doing it every day. Did you go on vacation last year? Yep. Well, how did you determine? Well, I went on Airbnb and looked at the reviews. That's data. It's not a number, but it's a word, it's information. Or, okay, when you go to the doctor, what do? Well, they read out my vitals, they read out my cholesterol, they read out, that's data. And then they're telling you what to do. Everything you're doing today has data, and just reframe it as if someone told you that they were going to give you a 10,000 piece puzzle, when you put it together, you're able to answer all your questions. Why would you be scared of that? You might be scared of it, but you should be excited about learning how to put it together.
Yeah. So, thinking about that, and then maybe some of the barriers that maybe hinder organizations from getting to the next level. One of the skills I think especially for the person that considers themselves non-data, is at least learning how to specify and really discuss and what that business question is. is how to really define that business question. Do you see that as well, or?
100%. I always say that, like, when you go to school, you learn from forms of communication. You learn how to read, you learn how to write. We don't take courses on listening, believe it or not. And we don't typically, we take courses sometimes on speaking, but we take courses on speaking on how to lecture. We don't take courses on how to question. And those, to me, are the most important things. Is you have to learn how to question, so that you might have a question like, how was my marketing campaign last year? That is not a great answer or question to answer with data, because you ask 10 different people, you're going to get 10 different results. Compared to what? Compared to last marketing campaign, compared to the one this time last year, across different channels are you looking at, across different age groups? What are your dimensions? What are your segmentation? What does good look like? All of those things, you need to have this framework of asking those questions. And if someone doesn't know the answer, figuring out how much of the puzzle, maybe you do all of that and you get back 3/4 of the puzzle. Can you make a decision with 3/4? Maybe. Depends on the answer, right? If it's something that's life or death or strategic, probably not. But if it's something more operational, like, it was a good campaign, let's run it again next year, let's approve the budget, it's good enough. And so it really gets back to listening to other people, so you get more puzzle pieces, and then questioning everyone about what that means to them, and being very specific. I always equate it to everyone in corporate setting is usually familiar with SMART objectives. You just apply the same thing to questions. They have to be SMART questions. They have to be specific, measurable, answerable, driven by data, time bound, same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And although, and I think in marketing, it is a little more difficult than in other areas, in manufacturing or in other areas, it is more difficult. That is what we do, though, and that's why it is a challenge for marketers when they ask, well, how well did we do? Is then one of the first things that we do is get into the data and understand, well, what kind of data do you have, so that we can help you to answer the question that you want, and at the detail level that you want. And one of the big challenges we have in then supporting that question is making sure that the data is correct. So tell us about what you do to make sure that the data is clean, is valid, and in the end, of course, is useful to make the right kind of business decisions for the organization.
Yeah, I mean, obviously tools and technology help, but a lot of it starts with, we've had organizations where they don't think about data quality in the front. So it's like building a house. You're not going to come to the lot and start putting a house. You're going to blueprint. Okay, well, I need windows to get sunlight for vitamin D. I need a second floor, so I need stairs. I need a place to store food, so I need a kitchen. Same thing with this, is I need to understand what I need. Okay, I need to understand customers' age groups. So whether I'm doing it through a survey, whether I'm doing it through it's a membership card where I get it, I'm going to store their age. I'm going to store it as a drop down in the survey. I mean, it could be as simple as, we don't allow free form text because people could spell out a state. And obviously there's technology that fixes this, but it's about designing what you want, what the outcome, visualizing the outcome, and then working backwards. And then sometimes it's using tools, especially if you're trying to analyze customer sentiment, right? That's not necessarily easy to do manually. Did someone post on Twitter, and was that a negative for the company? Was that a positive? That's where you definitely have to leverage the technology, but it all starts with, what is that blueprint? So I like to have organizations visualize the ideal outcome and then working back, but don't think about data quality at the end. Think about it in the beginning, is what do you need that data outcomes to be? And that'll help you lead to the question, but then it matches with the question. So you meant, one of the examples I'll mention, working with one organization, they asked this question, how was my marketing campaign? And the fascinating thing about it was the question wasn't specific enough, because what had actually happened is the total net sales were actually lower than what they were expecting. And so everyone was like, okay, turns out when you questioned and you challenged and you understood everything, they actually sold more volume. They had more leads, more lead conversion. What had happened is due to the program, they had put in a discounting policy. And so the discounts went up 12%. So if the question was the campaign successful? I would argue it was. The challenge was the discounting brought it back. But if you didn't think to pause and think about the other parts of the data that are relevant, and you didn't have that in your data model, you would have not done the campaign again, even though it was wildly successful. So what they did was the discounting over the top? Was it useful? It's dialogue, and then maybe they lower it as much, knowing that if you lower it, maybe not as many people are going to convert. That's that kind of give and take, but at least it became a dialogue as opposed to saying, no, we didn't make as much money, so it wasn't successful.
Yeah, right. And that's where you also have to include kind of a whole data framework as to how you're going to look at that specific business question, because it could be that the discounts were right and that the marketing was correct, but we entered into a recession, or the interest rates went up,
Absolutely.
or the housing starts, slowed down, or something like that. And so, you'd really do have to have a complete data framework that fits in with those business decisions. And then, to your point as well, is then not only understanding what that data is that underlies all that, but then also making sure that it's clean and vetted and complete and what have you, to really give you, something that's not just garbage in and garbage out.
Absolutely. Garbage in, garbage out is the worst to me because it's preventable, right? It leads to bad decisions, but it's also very preventable if you do things the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we close, is there anything else you'd like to bring up or mention that we haven't talked about?
I think the highlight for me is I really believe that solving marketing challenges, organization challenges, life challenges, we have everything we need, except sometimes we as individuals don't have the right mindset. We don't have the right soft skills of questioning. We don't have, in science, they use the scientific method. Let me have a guess and then do everything in my power to disprove it. And if I can't disprove it, whereas what we typically do, and it's not our fault, it's bias, it's not intentional, is we go into a meeting with our answer, like, well, we need to do this. And then anytime we see anything that validates that, we're like, that's the answer, we're done. We stop looking, confirmation bias. And when someone else is talking and they're not agreeing with us, we're not listening. We're thinking in our head, how are we going to reply to them and shut them down? And we're not actually actively listening. So to me, the biggest takeaway is you, yourself, families, kids, learn those soft skills. They are more critical than ever before.
Yeah, it's almost like the universities have to add another year on to understand what those soft skills are. Although what I've seen, I've done a lot of teaching over the last couple of years at different universities here in Georgia, and then also in North Carolina. And one of the things that I've found is that a lot of the universities now are doing these project-based learning where you have 3 or 4 or 6 maybe people in a team. And I think that is one of the ways that they're actually starting to learn how to learn those soft skills, so that they can understand what somebody else's biases are, what theirs are, how to manage the team, how to really define the business question, and then how to find the data that will then end up supporting the ability to analyze and deliver results based on what that business question was.
Absolutely, because you go through school and you do individual projects, you go to work, you're never alone. So they definitely, and I feel like they have the outcome there. What's missing sometimes is the fundamental knowledge of those soft skills. So for example, you're doing a group project. That doesn't automatically make you an active listener. You need to understand that, by the way, we're flawed. We don't listen. We have a bias. We tend to zone people out. But here are strategies that you can do. One of the most important lessons I learned is because I have ADHD, I tend to be all over the place, is someone said, when someone's talking, don't think about the next question, don't think anything, but then recite back what they said in your own words. It makes them realize that you're listening, but it actually helps you and your brain process it. And it was been like a lifesaver to me, because it wasn't just being polite, it was learning how to actively listen. wasn't in a course. It wasn't in a university. It was, I don't even know where I heard that, but those are the things that we have to complement with the projects. But I agree, the projects go a great way because it's a great way to collaborate.
Mm. And it is definitely a way to reinforce and hopefully build on those soft skills. Well, anyway, Kevin, thank you so much. This has really been great, and really appreciate it. Now, your book, give us the title of the book, and then also where we can find it and how we can, learn more about your book.
Yeah, and thank you for that. It's Turning Data into Wisdom. It's not for data scientists, not for data. It's for anyone who wants to not be overwhelmed with information and learn how to make better decisions. You can do it at an organization level, or you can do it for home, personal. What am I going to make for dinner? Where should we go on vacation? What type of car should I buy? So you can find on Amazon, most major online bookstores that I've seen. Either just type in my last name or type in Turning Data into Wisdom.
Fantastic. So Turning Data into Wisdom. And Kevin Hanegan, thank you so much. And for the listeners, please stay tuned for many other videos in this series of the backstory on marketing. Please visit marketingmachine.prorelevant.com and download the first chapter of my book, which is now out. And also it's available on Amazon as well. So Post-COVID Marketing Machine. And then lastly, don't forget to sign up for more episodes on this podcast series. And if you like it, please rate it with 5 stars. Thank you so much. And Kevin, thank you.
Yep. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.